cloud. Here we go. There we go. So it is so nice to see the two of you and whoever's watching this later on. And as people join us, I expect a couple more people. But today is going to be probably a little bit of a different session because we don't have the author today. Michelle Obama, unfortunately, is not with us, but I hope that we can actually have a conversation about her second book. And it is about the second book that we were talking about, The Light We Carry. I just want to make sure, Tom and Paramel, can you just do a thumbs up or something that you can hear me okay? That we're all good to go?
Yes.
Thank you. Wonderful. So a few things just for, and Tom, you can hear okay? Tom's working on his audio, so I just wanted to make sure that he can hear us. But we're going to keep on going. So today's conversation is about the book, The Light We Carry by Michelle Obama. Before we get started on the conversation, though, I wanted to just remind people this is going to be a little bit of a different discussion. So first of all, we are going to have a brief conversation about careers, because that's always been something that we start off with our authors. Whoever has read the book or whoever has followed Ms. Obama's career knows about hers. I thought I'd share a little bit about my own career journey and some of the ups and downs and some of the questions I put to our authors, and invite others to talk about that as well. But then I do want to go into the book, and I'm going to try and take it chapter by chapter. I've got a couple of questions from each book and some conversations that I think I'd like to have about the book. And then again, if there are other questions that we have moving forward, I would welcome you to put them into the chat or just to unmute and come forward with the questions that you might have. So in this instance, feel free to keep your microphone on throughout, keep your video on throughout if you'd like. And as we move forward, we can just have that conversation. There we go. Nice to see you, Parimal. Hello there. And Tom, you got your microphone working, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Can you hear us?
Yeah, unfortunately, I've not read the book, so my
That's okay.
contribution might be very minimal.
That's okay. It'll be on the themes that come up, I think, and I'd love to have your conversation about that. Tom, I just want to make sure. Can you hear us? Oh, Tom's still adjusting, so that's okay. We'll get to that. So again, I wanted to reconfirm for the 90 minutes. This is eligible for somebody's coming in. So let me just bring Yonida in. This is eligible for 1.5 hours of LSO professionalism credits. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm going to wait until Yonida comes before I go on. Yonida, welcome. It's a small, hello there.
Everyone.
Hello there. It's a smaller group today, and without the author, really is intended to be more of a conversation. I am recording, just so you know, we've already pressed the record button. So this is something that, again, I want to hopefully have some honest discussions, but I also want to let people know that we are recording as we move forward. And it's interesting because at the beginning of the year, when we first started these conversations, I turned to Elise Akinhora, and I talked about brave spaces being exhausting, or she talked about brave spaces being exhausting, and instead using the phrase accountable spaces. And it was interesting for anyone who has in fact read this book, how Ms. Obama herself actually talks about that exhaustion that people sometimes feel when they're asked to hold up that space. And so I think it was really an eye-opener for me when I started reading that part of the book, that she actually talks about the challenges and how tired people feel about holding spaces. And I thought, it's interesting that we have had that as part of our book club, as part of the conversation, that we're wanting to have accountable spaces, because sometimes asking people to be brave is just too much. And so it's just not feasible to always ask people to be brave necessarily. So accountability is what I ask for in this book club. Welcome, Anne. As I mentioned before we get started, it's going to be a little bit of a different book club. It's a more intimate book club, but we are recording already. So just so you know that we are recording, feel free to pop in at any time. What I wanted to do in this time, the first bit, we're going to start with, I'm going to give you a little bit, for those of you who may not know it, a little bit about my own career journey. And I'd ask for other people's input as well as we're moving through one of the things about Miss Obama's book, and I feel like I have to call her Miss Obama, but I might sometimes go on in Michelle, because the way she writes is very familiar, and as if you're having a cup of tea or a cup of coffee across from each other. And so I might go between Ms. Obama and Michelle as we move forward. But one of the things that really, really struck me from her book is how down to earth and how honest and how real I felt she was. And so I thought, let me just start off by a little bit of that from my own perspective. Some of you know my story, others might not. So I just want to give a really brief grounding, because I asked people about their career journeys. And from mine, I'm going to try and not to repeat too much of what's already available or what I've said in the past. Um, Being a child of immigrants really has impacted me. I know that's something that I've always repeated time and time and time again, but I can't not say that in this instance, because I think it really has been important. And for me, it's easy to say a child of immigrants, because immigrants mean so many different things to so many different people. There's different types of immigrants who have come to Canada or whatnot. My parents very specifically came to Canada at a time when economic situations in Greece were really quite challenging. And they came from an agricultural society. Neither of them had a lot of education. So for them, working hard, being able to make it in this new country was really, really important. But making it this new country and being able to adapt to this really overwhelming country that was very different from theirs was something that was always there. And I found myself, when I was reading The Light We Carry, reflecting on that as Michelle was talking about her family situation. The family dynamic, the family foundation really did imprint on me from a very early age. So whether it was the hard work ethic, whether it was the ability to maintain very not collegial, familial feeling, that became a value for me. Family became a value for me and guided me in a lot of my career choices. And in fact, I first started off wanting to be a teacher and got dissuaded from that only because my parents were involved in a commercial litigation matter where I saw how immigrants were treated when they may not have had appropriate representation. And for me, that was the turning point. I thought, forget about going to teachers college. I actually want to go to law school to be able to offer that to other immigrants down the road. I didn't know anything about the law. It was something that was, apart from the two lawyers on each side, I had no other people in my life who were lawyers who could sort of give me that guidance. And in fact, only one other older cousin who had gone to university. So for me, the whole experience of applying to university, getting through university, going to law school, applying and getting into law school, and then thinking about jobs afterwards was really something fundamentally new. Along each way, it was something I had to navigate. My parents were there if I wanted to ask questions, but they didn't have the information that they needed to give to me. So the first job that I took was in a small in a small firm. It was a full service firm, Sodas Carvanis. And part of the reason I chose that firm to article and to work for about 3 or 4 years as an associate was because of a couple of things. First of all, it was full service. So for me, I would be able to dabble in a couple of things. I quickly realized I did not like corporate law. Sorry, Anne, but I did not enjoy corporate law. For me, the litigation was what was interesting to me for various parts of my personality. And also the fact that there was a familiarity to it in terms of the Hellenic background of some of the partners, not all of them, but some of the partners. And what I found, that the concept of differentness comes up in Michelle Obama's book. And what I found at the time I was going through articling applications and interviews, I still remember choosing an olive green suit to wear instead of a dark blue suit. It was very intentional because that was what I wanted to wear and how I wanted to come forward into these articling interviews. And there was one cocktail party at a big, large law firm that will remain nameless for the time being, where as I was sitting there with a drink in my hand, listening to the conversations, everybody around me was in a navy blue suit. And I thought, that's not how I want to move through the world. I liked what they were saying, but it just didn't feel like me. The differentness stood out. I didn't have the language that they were talking about necessarily. Whereas when I was able to go to the other firm, it felt really comfortable. It felt very safe to some degree, but it was still exciting because they were still lawyers and I had not had professionals in my life. Fast forward 3 or 4 years later, and in doing litigation, I realized I really enjoyed being able to solve problems. I really enjoyed being with people. I really enjoyed speaking to others about their concerns. I was and am a people person. I did enjoy speaking. I did enjoy public speaking. So going to court when you had the chance to go to court and things didn't get resolved in the last minute was actually a positive for me. But then the conflict that came with family law and civil litigation was something I just couldn't muster. I just didn't want to have to live that conflict on a regular basis. And while a number of people told me then, stick it out for 5 to 10 years, or 5 to 8 years, I never had gotten as high as 10, but people would say 5 to 8 years, you need the learning curve, you need to experience that. Something still felt off. And at some point, I underwent what was then career counseling with a psychologist who focused on careers. It was the equivalent of what coaching has turned out to be, if you will. And I realized, you know what, there was a reason why I was feeling more excited about the extracurricular work that I was doing. OBA, creating programs, teaching part-time in a law-based course for a community college. There was something that was drawing me to all those types of activities more so than my day job. And there was this there was this phrase that kept coming up: did I pass the doorknob test? And it's something that I ask many of my students, my clients: do you pass the doorknob test when you're walking out of the elevator or getting off the street into your office? Are you turning the doorknob of your office really excitedly and opening it up and thinking, this is where I want to be? Or are you not quite passing the doorknob test and feeling a little less than enthusiastic most of the time? Because we don't always feel enthusiastic, but most of the time you're passing the doorknob test or not. And I was finding that in the latter part of that year, I wasn't passing the doorknob test. I've asked, and many of you who've been on these sessions before will know, one of the questions that I ask is about serendipity. And truly, the intentional part was when I actually engaged a career counselor. That was very intentional, very focused. I needed someone to sort of help me through what my mind was thinking and what my interests were and where I could look. But there were no available opportunities really that felt right up my alley, until very serendipitously I was sitting, and I can still see myself in on my couch in our first home in the living room, where I was reading the Ontario reports back when the Ontario reports were actually in paperback, and I loved it, and saw 2 job postings at my alma mater. One was for an alumni coordinator, and the other was for career development officer, I think is how they labeled it at that time, CDO. Both the alumni coordinator position was not a new position. The second one, the CDO, was a new position. And as I was reading that description, it just kind of hit me. I remember saying to my husband, this is the role. This is the role that I've been looking for. It feels right. It seems appropriate. It's within law, but not in law. It's in education, which I'd always still had that interest in. And I thought, I have no clue really what a career development officer does, but it sounds like it's something I'd want to at least pursue. So very serendipitous that I was looking at the ORs at that particular time, noticed this particular job, applied for both. And I oftentimes tell people, I really messed up. I was called in to do the alumni position interview. I messed that role up entirely. I remember that interview walking away thinking that was the lousiest interview I could imagine. I had not dressed appropriately. I had not prepared appropriately. My heart was not really in that role. And it came out. It came out in the question, in the answers that I gave, in the conversation. I was always navigating the conversation towards careers and towards career development. And I'm so grateful for the then dean contacting me and saying, you really didn't do that. She was very upfront. You really didn't do well at all at that interview. It was lousy, but I want you to come in for the second role because there's something about that I think is more up your alley. She invited me in. I was more prepared. I was dressed appropriately. I took it very seriously. I wanted it. And lo and behold, that role, when I was invited to that role, really led to a wide variety of doors opening that I had no clue at that time might open. Fast forward, the other sort of milestone that I tell people is when I became assistant dean, it was only about 4 years into the role, 3 or 4 years at Osgood, and the position became available for the, third time in 4 years. And I thought I was too junior. It was too new. I would be supervising my colleagues. I really didn't feel comfortable. How would I be able to handle the stresses of all the things? The three people before me had all been a little bit more senior than me, and I was a little ambivalent about applying, but decided what the heck, I'll put in my name. And Dean Peter Hogg, if anybody knows constitutional law, Peter Hogg was the person who took a chance on me, invited me into that role, and I kept that role for 9 years and loved seeing the changes that were happening at the law school over the years. It was really seeing the faculty, the students, the legal profession shift and change and stay the same in some ways as we moved forward. And so a lot of different situations, whether it was tuition increase, whether it was building a residence, whether it was a new law school renovation, for example, a lot of things, new curriculum that had not been done before. There were a lot of new things that happened, and that was really exciting. And it made me realize as I moved along that one of the things that I would call myself was an intrapreneur. So while I was not quite ready to be an entrepreneur, a person who is in business for herself or himself, I was ready to help create new programs for other institutions. That led to the University of Toronto, where the Internationally Trained Lawyers program came up. And again, I still remember being for about a week with my desk was a box because they hadn't ordered the furniture yet. I had to order it. I had a telephone and a stack of papers and a couple of pencils. And we had to go through hiring, we had to go through planning, we had to go through development. I eventually did get a desk, but that newness of starting from scratch and learning that there was a world of internationally educated professionals, not just lawyers, that I had not even thought about previously in my previous role was, again, something that I hadn't been aware of. Working with immigrants was, I realized, something quite important to me. And so this role, the ability to help provide a pathway for immigrants or those who had left Canada for their studies and were coming back, was really quite a mission that I wanted to. And I think a lot, I've said this before, goes back to my parents and my experience as a child of immigrants. As many of you know, I then moved on to work at MAG for a year. And this is where the Ministry of the Attorney General, my apologies, I shouldn't use acronyms. That was sort of a bit of a serendipitous move. And I think one of the things I always say to people is that's where I let my ego get the better of me. It was, I was recruited into that role, and somebody had said, we know your work, we really like your work, come join us, we've got an opening coming up. And I thought, this is kind of neat. It was good to feel good, right? To be seen. And Michelle talks about that feeling of being seen. And there were some challenges, but I thought this is something I do want to try. And it was also an experience with the Ministry of the Attorney General. It got me to see the one thing that I will take away from that experience that I had not anticipated was learning about the breadth of tremendous work that gets done. This was on the civil side of the ministry. The 1,000 or so lawyers who are doing fabulous work within the ministry that I think oftentimes goes unnoticed. It's one of the largest law firms. It is the largest law firm, I say, in Ontario, when you think about the civil and the criminal side. And it was really interesting to be able to sort of see the different pathways that people came, the different reasons why people joined MAG, and the work that was being done within MAG. But the lure to start something new again happened within about a year. And I struggled. I thought this was a full-time role, that was a permanent role. There was all those things that are connected with permanent role, right? There's a pension, there's a steady income, you'll have it forever and ever. You don't have to ever go into the job search again. But there was this chance to work on a pilot with the then Ryerson University, now TMU, that was going to create this new pathway to licensing for people who were in the licensing program. So instead of articling, they wanted to create this new way of thinking about licensing through an online experiential component, and then also a placement. And I thought that's kind of neat. It hasn't been done before. There's a need for it. It was going to be the underdog again. I think it was, okay, what about this program is going to be new? Anything new in law takes a while to be accepted. And that was something that really was valuable to me. I realized the immigrant experience, being there for people who might be different or not seen sometimes, are things that really, really mattered to me. And I would get to work with a person who I really got to respect. And even though it had only been a year at MAG, even though I liked for the most part what I was doing at MAG, there were all those things about permanent versus a pilot contract job for 3 years without that level of certainty that we all look to. I decided to make that leap and head over. And I have to say that there's never a day that I regretted making that move. It was exciting to be part of it. It was fascinating. We were building a plane as it was taking off, and I often use that phrase. I got hired in January. We needed to bring a team in. We needed to bring mentors in. Tom, if you remember what being a mentor is like, we needed to bring subject experts in. We needed to create a program, in fact, and we had to do all that by the end of August. And so January to August, literally, it's like birthing a child for those 9 months, just getting started. And there was still a lot to do as we moved into that first cohort, but it was really an incredible opportunity. And one of the things that I valued in the book as I was reading it was the reminder that nobody does it on their own. The team that was around was absolutely phenomenal, and being able to do that with their input was incredible. But along the way, and as we started building the law school as well, that inkling of intrapreneur to entrepreneur was always nagging me at the back of my mind. There was always something to say, okay, what about doing something independently? What about trying to do this not under the auspices of of an institution? And I'll also say, what about not doing it under the safety of an institution? For me, being part of a larger organization that people knew, whether they liked it or not, they knew it, whether it was U of T, whether it was Osgood, whether it was TMU, or whether it was MAG, people knew the organizations I was connected to. And it was scary to think that, oh my gosh, if I go out on my own, I lose that protection, that safety, that certainty, that security of being with a known organization. Who the heck is going to think about working with me at that point? And that kept me back. That held me back for probably about 5 years, because I started doing my coaching certification. That held me back for a while, until finally there was some voice, and we'll talk a little bit about some of these things as we move forward, but there was some voice in me that said, now's the time. You can do it. Yeah, it might be a little scary, but push yourself to try something brand new. Push yourself to believe in yourself, your brand, your work, your abilities. And I'll tell you, it was, when I go back to thinking about this career journey, part of it, and I know things were really different. My husband reminds me all the time. When my dad and mom came, my mom came first as a single woman, then she brought my dad over. He didn't like working for other people for too long. He did it for a few years, and then he said, that's it. We're going to find our own way of doing things. He opened up his own grocery store. Then it was a bakery. He flip-flopped between bakeries and grocery stores for a few years. He wanted to be his own boss. And all my life, all I kept hearing was, if I could do it, an immigrant with literally, it was $100 in his, no, it was $20 in his pocket, because he'd had 100, but he had spent that on the way here, without the language ability, then anybody can. And I realize it's quite a different situation to set up a business now than it may have been in the 60s or early 70s. I value that. I get that. But that little reminder kept saying to me, well, why not? If dad could do it, and he managed it really well, why can't I try it? And it was something that was too much a part of what I wanted to do, that I couldn't resist it. And so a year and a half ago, it's now about a year and a half ago, I made that transition, and it's been fabulous. With its ups and downs, I'm not going to say that little voice isn't there still. It says, no, you can't do this. it's constantly reaffirming the reasons why I am doing it and how I can do it and how I can do it differently. And so I would not have ever thought when I was in law school in my second or third year that my career would have taken the path that it did. It was something that was very small part planning, a lot of serendipity in terms of that first OR ad, in terms of the job position becoming available as assistant dean when it did, that the U of T got funding for a bridging program, and a colleague of mine called me and said, they need somebody who's seen student life or student programming from start to finish. Why don't you consider it? There are a lot of serendipitous moments along the way, and those are but a few of the serendipitous moments. And the one thing that I'll say before I open it up to people to ask about any of their career journeys that they want to share is that don't think that along the way it all happened, yes, I wanted this job and I got this job. I oftentimes remind people that for each of the jobs that I had, for each of the roles that I had applied to so many other roles that I was turned down for. I didn't have the qualifications. There were other people who were better. It wasn't the right time. It wasn't the right organization. I didn't have the skill set that potentially was needed at the time. And so there were disappointments. And even within the jobs, right? I tend to be a very positive person. I tend to see the perspective of the positive experience. There were challenges. I talked about the tuition increase at Osgoode. It was the one time that I have cried in my professional capacity in front of my boss. One of a couple of times where I just thought, I'm so worried about what this tuition increase is going to do to students, to legal education, to the profession at large. So there were challenges along the way, and by sharing sort of the career, very brief overview of the career trajectory, I don't want anybody who is either listening now or watching later to think that it was all sun and roses or whatever the saying is. There were challenges along the way, and I'm giving sort of some of the experiences. Always happy to sort of open up and talk about some of the other challenges. Before we get into the book, because again, one of the things that I really valued about Michelle Obama's book is her vulnerability. And I thought, let me start off by sort of giving a sense of what my career path has been, some of the challenges, some of the joys of it. And then we're going to go into the book, but I'm just going to pause. If people have questions or want to share any comments, again, we are recording, so I just want to put that on the table. But about your own path or your own careers, I'd want to take a couple of minutes right now.
I'll go also because I have no shame. Um, I found it really interesting in how you were describing your career because the aspects of serendipity that you talk about, I refer to as the universe opening up. And it seems to be, you can't force it, it will open up when it's time. And that was the same thing that's happened to me. I have a bizarre career trajectory that only makes sense if you know me very well. I started off, I was in art school, and then I transferred to film school. I finished film school, worked in film and television for a few years, became incredibly frustrated with my role because it was the first of many instances where I was being placed in a position because of the fact that I was a woman and I was pretty damn good at getting paperwork done, but I the trajectory for me has really been anytime somebody has tried to fit me into a role and I don't feel that it fits properly. Square peg, round hole, that whole thing. So I I really enjoyed the business aspect of it. I left my work right before the industry collapsed, so there was nowhere else to go. I left a really bad job situation before the industry collapsed, and so there was nowhere really to go within film, and I did my MBA. It was a toss-up between my MBA or law school, but I had 2 weeks to get my MBA application in, and the law school deadline had passed, so I thought, "Hey, all right, if I have business, that'll be fine. I'll do business." Um, so I did my MBA. I found that even though it wasn't that long ago, it doesn't feel like that long ago, it was like 20 years ago. There were only 3 options available to women graduating from the MBA. You either got into accounting, HR, or marketing. You could not have another role. The banks weren't even looking at us for training programs. We had no other option. And because I had a creative background, marketing was an easy switch for me. So I went into marketing, and again, another situation where I was being told this will be your role, and I was struggling with it, especially like it was yet another instance where I was being patted on the head and said, be a good little girl, don't talk and don't make waves. I was within a female-dominated industry, which was female-dominated company, which was so disappointing to see women sort of internalizing the kind of behavior that you would normally see from from really unaware men. But I didn't like where my career was going. I was not going to wait it out in a very junior role, and I wasn't excited by what I was doing. I call it the Sunday scaries. Like for me, it's Sunday night. If I'm excited about where I'm going on Monday morning, then I'm good.
So your doorknob test is a Sunday scaries. I like that.
Sunday scaries. If I am falling apart Sunday night and like, really hoping I get sick, then I know it's time to sort of shift. I did marketing for a few years, and then I was just fed up, and I had worked with in-house counsel within my company. I really enjoyed it. And I thought, hey, I'll become a lawyer. Never met a lawyer aside from in-house counsel within my corporation, did not understand a single thing about the law school process, about the legal industry. I had all of 3 weeks to get my application together, write the LSATs, and get into law school. So, did not seem inconceivable to me. It was like there was this little voice in my head where I'm like, all right, I'll just go to law school. And I applied to Osgood. I applied under the mature student designation because I had been working. I didn't have extracurriculars or anything like that. I'd been in the workforce for a while. And I was called in for an interview, which was the first of 2 times I met Gina while I was at school. So that first time I came in, interviewed with Gina, then had to go and interview with a professor, I can't remember her name, phenomenal woman who taught me international law. But you calmed my nerves enough that I was able to do very well in the interview and obviously got in. Had a awful first year, awful. I was sick. My doctor, because I suffer from migraines, my doctor had put me on medication that had the delightful side effect of turning me into a total moron. And so tanked my first year. The only noise I heard in law school was everything depends on first year. First year will determine your entire career trajectory. You don't do well in first year, you don't do OTIs, you're done for. So I contacted Gina the second time. I talked to Gina while I was at school, and Gina said, okay, you'll have it rough. You want to be a lawyer, you'll be a lawyer. Best advice. And you set me up with the first year dean, who gave me my second piece of excellent advice, and I still go by it, is fine, something's happened, give yourself 2 days, be sad. On the 3rd day, you're going to wake up and figure out what you're going to do about it. And I figured it out. I ended up graduating into a recession. There were no articling positions, and somehow, by some stroke of freaking luck, ended up with a very good articling position with a criminal firm. Got me into court. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. That led to a career as a litigator. Were a lot of bumps, really rough. Like first few years were really bad, but something in my articling year, I don't know what it is, but I had a little voice in my head that said, first 5 years are going to be bad. And I don't know why, but I just sort of stuck with that. Within 5 years, ended up within a construction litigation firm, and that was going to be my job. I loved it. My dad was in construction, so I knew the industry. I was working with a lawyer who I was working with 3 lawyers who were phenomenal mentors to me, and ended up becoming a construction lawyer. Moved on from that role because, again, I was being pegged within a junior role without any opportunity to expand in any way, not even just go higher, just change and evolve. And I found that very, very frustrating. So I went to one job, it's awful, left after about a year and a half, went to another firm, and I had the voice that told me at a year, this is not good. I did not listen to the voice. I didn't listen to it. Stayed in a role for 2.5 years, and I'm freaking lucky it didn't kill me, because I ended up I was sick more than I've ever been sick in my entire life, which I think was the universe kind of kicking me in the butt saying, get out. I ended up getting COVID before COVID was even named COVID. Nobody knew what it was. Worked through the entire thing, got very bad long haul COVID and thought I was dying, didn't know what was wrong with me. And I was working with people who were less than gracious. And fortunately, with the lockdowns, COVID was my saving grace. So despite the fact that, I woke up every day thinking that I was dying, at least I had time to think. And it was the one time within a 10-year career where I stopped to think, is this what I want in my life? Does my life look like what it was that I had imagined? And it didn't. So I started thinking, okay, well, what do I want to do? I liked my area of law. I wanted to do that. I wanted personal time. So I thought, okay, in-house, I'll do in-house construction. Sounds great. And then I started thinking, all right, well, what kind of role? What type of industry? Where do I want to look? And I thought, hey, I'll work in an engineering firm. I had engineering clients. I knew the work. It was challenging. The next day, I found an engineering in-house counsel job and ended up getting it. They had already had someone in mind, but they met with me. They talked to me. They liked me. I ended up doing that. And yeah, it's been great. The in-house role, I had no idea what in-house counsel did. I freaking clue. But I'd done all this other stuff. And I'm like, well, whatever I don't know, I'll figure it out.
And
Sadly, I am getting that little nagging feeling again. So, we'll see how that.
And I think listening to that is really incredible. You are segueing us really nicely, because I don't know who has read the book, either of you or who's watching this later, but I want to talk about the book because there are a lot of themes that you have said that that were being pulled out from the book. And whether we get to all of the chapters, I'm not too worried about. There's some themes that I think are really important, but when I have the author, I ask the author what's their why for the book. And I really wish I could ask Michelle this, but I have to do a little bit of a guessing game here in terms of her why. Part of the conversation with Miss Obama that always surprised me, whether it was her first book or this book, is that you've got this vision of such an accomplished woman. She really is quite accomplished in so many things that she's done. Yet she writes so openly and so frequently about her feeling of not enough, right? And that to me was really quite a revelation. And in her book, if I were to, I think she gives us the answer to the why did she write this in her book. And Anne, it's some of the things that you've said. So she says, instead of when will this end? And I'm looking because I want to get the words right from her own book. She says, instead of asking the question, when will this end? Whether it's the pandemic, whether it's a challenging part of our career, whether it's a challenging part of our life, when will this end? Whatever this is, we need to start asking another set of questions about challenge and change. And Anne, you kind of were answering this without really realizing it. The questions that she poses instead of when will this end are, how do we adapt? How do we get more comfortable and less paralyzed inside uncertainty? And that always reminds me, when we were starting the internationally trained lawyers program at U of T, one of the things that I used to say as a motto for all these number of immigrants who are coming and going through all sorts of changes within the profession, their personal lives, their jurisdictions. I said, get comfortable with the uncomfortable, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I saw this from her book, and I thought the other part that she added was less paralyzed, because discomfort and fear can totally paralyze us. I've been there. I don't want to speak for others, but how do you let go past that discomfort? The other part that she asks is, what tools do we have to sustain ourselves? So what are the resources that we have internally plus externally? Where do we find extra pillars of support? Whether it was the first year dean, myself, whoever else, and came to you with that extra support, whether for me it was a career counselor, the students, the faculty members, the clients that come my way. What are the extra pillars of support? How can we create safety and stability for others? Because as a whole, we're a lot stronger than just ourselves independently. And that was the last question. And if we work as one, what might we manage to overcome together? And what I've seen, that growth of the international lawyer, for example, and Yaniva, you're one example where that first program at U of T, that was a bridging program that has since led to LLMs being started and 3 or 4 different internationally trained lawyers groups, different names, different titles. But again, that opportunity is really wonderful for people to have as a network. Alone, not very easy to make changes, but as a group, absolutely more possible. I thought that was her why, to be able to change our thinking from when will this end to asking all those questions, to be able to give us the tools that we need. So I just want to go into a few of the chapters. The first part of what she says is the power of small. And because she used that word, feeling less paralyzed, what she was talking about in that first chapter, the power of small, was sometimes the big stuff, whether it's world events that are happening or our career, the big challenges that we see, the big stuff can be really, really overwhelming. And sometimes, she says, it's easier to handle when you deliberately put something small alongside it. Not that it's all going to go away, but what's that small thing that you can do that you can start and let the big thing feel a little less scary and a little less insurmountable. What she says is that move from it's all too much back into the direction of I've got this. And her small thing, I use the air quotes, was knitting. She took up knitting when she was starting to get overwhelmed, because everything that was in her head was just stopping her sometimes from moving forward, and getting out of her head into her hands, and taking a break from thinking about whatever that was. Because as she writes, all you had to focus on was one stitch, one line at a time, second stitch, second line, third stitch, third line. And all of a sudden you've got this yarn and 2 needles, and something has come from there, whether it's a sweater, a scarf, whatever the case is. You've gone from the it's all too much to I've got this. And she's those small little wins along the way can give you the energy that you sometimes need to move forward, to power through those bigger questions. In a law practice, you can get so overwhelmed with client demands, with management issues, with your own career advising within the practice of law, what's happening in the court system, what's happening in a systemic way in terms of the justice system, for that matter. And it's not that they're not important, absolutely very important. But if we want to be able to move forward, we have to sort of also remember to still take those small steps. For me, during the pandemic, part of those small things were puzzles. I've always loved word searches, so that still continues. And I tried coloring. I'm not as great a fan of it as because I can't get this. I think about the lines too much, and I always want to color out of the lines, and I find it too limiting. So puzzles have continued to be, and reading have continued to be my small thing. I wonder, when you get overwhelmed, what are some of the power of small things that you turn to that give you that sense of, I can do this, I've got this? What are your small things to go to? Tom, welcome.
Thank you.
Yay, we can hear you. Yay. There we
I
go.
was having trouble
No problem.
with my other computer. And you brought back pleasant memories mentioning Peter Hogg. I did my master's of constitutional law with him. He was a perfect gentleman and a really good friend. I've been, as you know, I've been doing the legal thing for a long time. And you mentioned a career counselor. One of the things I did not have, or I did not make use of at the time because I thought I had to do it all myself. And I articled and worked at some good Bay Street law firms and was partner and blah, blah, blah. But there was so much I did not know and I was scared of. And looking back in hindsight, I guess I'd say there are two things that is to you talked about a career counselor. I wish I had had the courage and the wisdom to have reached out to someone and said, I don't know what I want to do, or I don't, even if it's a problem that I'm fussing with. But instead I would put in 10 extra hours on my own, not to look stupid, and because I was a partner in charge and all of this stuff. And it would be so much easier to have reached out. And what I find is it makes such a big difference even today to have a good person to talk to. Just a simple, it can be another lawyer, or it can be just a friend to say, I'm really scared, or I'm really, really confused about what I should do. And to give up my ego or fear of I'm going to look stupid, or they won't think I know what I'm doing, and sometimes making an ethical decision and knowing whether it's this or that, it's ambivalent. Sometimes having a person or two just to talk to and bend their ear makes all of the difference in the world. And doing that has taught me not to underestimate. I don't do it for this reason, but the benefits that come back are incredible sometimes. Like, that I love teaching law and mentoring and all this stuff. And one of the things I always used to do when I taught law was I'd always say to people, like, and some students, well, I can't get my assignment in for this or for that reason. And I say, okay, because my wife's pregnant or something like this. And I'd say, okay, if you have, and when the baby comes, if it's a boy, name it Tom. If it's a girl, Thomasina. And Lordy, here I get a phone call 2 days ago. You'd know the person if I'm 20 or 21 in the law program, Andrew. And he said, Tom, I'm pleased to tell you that my wife and I had a baby. And it was a boy, so I named him Tom. Fortunately, it wasn't a girl, so I'd have to name her Thomasina. But I'm just saying the power of, if we can get beyond ourselves and our embarrassment of reaching out and asking for help, not only does it help us with our dilemma at the time, but it has positive feedbacks down the road.
Tom, I love that there's an LPP child with your name because of the interaction that you had. I think that is incredible. A couple of things that I want to point out, and welcome to Victoria. Victoria, just so you know, we are recording, just so that you are aware for later posting. But you talked about two things that Michelle uses or raises in her book. The one, and I want to come to it, is decoding your fear, actually understanding what your fear is, naming it. And being able to work on it then, and we'll come to that. But the other one, it was, for me, it was one of, I'll say it was my favorite part of her book, which is the kitchen table chapter. Let me just see if I can't remember what chapter that was, but her kitchen table chapter.
That's chapter 5.
Chapter 5, that really resonated. The group of people that we need as our as our go-to people, not being afraid to have those connections, making those connections as we move forward. So we're going to come to that. I wonder if anybody else has any thoughts other than knitting or puzzles. What's your powerful small activity that you go to when the big things just get too overwhelming? I'm just curious, because as people are looking at this, when you think about the professionalism, 1.5 hours of professionalism, wellness is really a part of that. And being able to remind ourselves when things get overwhelming, go to whatever your go-to is that will give you that sense of, I've got this. Any suggestions or any thoughts on what people are, Yanida? Yeah, what is it that you do?
So before I get there, I just wanted to briefly add on what Anne mentioned and what everyone mentioned. I practiced law in Greece before moving to Canada, and one of the few people I met when I moved here was Gina. And from our conversation, she was point on like everything I experienced after. She explained the process to me, and even though I was more optimistic, she's like, these are the things you will encounter. So it's very important to speak with people that know more than you. So that's what I want to mention. And Gina and I talked after, like in many points in my life where I was debating where to go next, and and I really liked how she listened and gave advice. So it was very important to me at the time. Because I moved countries, I encountered uncertainty, so I tried to navigate it. So when I found myself in 2020, after finishing the process, having becoming licensed, and then not having a job lined up, that was another point of uncertainty. But by that time, people would tell me this is the hardest thing you will encounter. Going back to the previous 5 years, by that time were also very bad. So like finances were as bad as they can get. My loans were piling up. So it was like this starting small, like that chapter really resonated with me, because I ordered all the painting by numbers I could afford on Amazon. And because I had a lot of time, so in addition to applying, I listened to those. I painted while I listened to books. So I went to the public library. I got my card. I downloaded Libby, which is the app, and then I listened to 100 books a year. I had 6 months, and I was going through books, like I think 2 days a book. One of the books was by Emily Fletcher, and she was a Broadway performer. She wrote a book about meditation. So her book is called Stress Less, Accomplish More. So I was very stressed at the time, and I knew that meditation wouldn't work for me because I'm always in my head. So she has a very simple technique. So she says, we're not yogis, so we should adopt meditation to our lives. And she says, just try 12 minutes, break it into 3 minutes, just observing noises around you, 9 minutes or like 7 minutes of finding a mantra, which can be any word, can be like let go or anything, and just repeat it. And every time you repeat it, it just grounds you even more. And just 2 minutes at the end, just being grateful, thinking of things you're grateful for. And during this is a habit that I kept since 2020. Every day before I start my day, before I go anxiously into my everyday, I just take 10 minutes to just breathe and do these steps. And it was 10 minutes of, no matter what's happening in the world, I'm here and everything else can wait. So that really helped me. So if it can help anyone else, well, that's what I'm sharing.
I really like the fact that you're saying it was just 10 minutes, but it grounded you and it could impact the rest of your 23 hours and 50 minutes. And I think that's really important that you did it, right? You were able to do it, and you were able to then get through listening to podcasts and your paint by numbers. And I think that really is something just as a really great reminder. I jotted down a couple of things from the chapter on decoding fear, because we start small, we think about these things that we can do, but then fear, we've got to be able to, and a couple of you have said it before, name it. When I was really taken by Michelle's openness, and on page 74, she says, I've lived with my fearful mind for 58 years now. She gets it. She understands it's there. We don't get along. And I like how she says, we don't get along. I don't like my fearful mind. She is every monster I've ever known. And she's also me. Those are our own words, right? I've become better able about accepting her presence. She's got real estate in my head, but this alone has now loosened her hold and lessened her stealth. By accepting her, by understanding that she's there, the doubt, the worries, the fears that we have, and giving them something else to do while you go off to, by naming it alone, allows us to then be able to not be fearful of it. Oh, one example, there's a professional example and there's a personal example. For me, public speaking was never the big issue for me. I always loved public speaking. That was never a problem. But for me, writing and writing large parts of work were always nerve-wracking for me. That and conflict. So I'll say both of them. And it would paralyze me. I would think, oh my God, I've now got to write this lengthy report or whatever else. I'm going to prove my stupidity, all those self-doubts that come up. I won't be able to do the research properly. I won't be able to, people won't be able to understand it. And it was always there. The nagging doubt of I'll be found out to be a fraud. The same feeling that I had walking up to the law school when I was admitted, thinking, oops, they made a mistake. Ha ha, I'm still going to be going through this now. That still was there with me when when the research and large writing was happening. And I'll tell you a recent thing, and if anybody has any suggestions, I would really welcome it. This recent thing on a personal basis, and I'm going to get a little vulnerable here, so please bear with me. I got my license at 16. I loved driving. Driving for me is my freedom. I could drive wherever I needed to, whatever I needed to do. It was my freedom to be and do what I needed wherever I needed to. I always knew I was scared to drive in Greece. I'm afraid of the mountains. However, in California in the spring, my husband and son did most of the driving. There was one part that seemed to be a sort of a fairly straightforward stretch. So I thought, no problem, I can handle this. 2-lane highways for about 2.5 hours, easy as pie. We were getting close to the coast. This was internally now. We were getting close to the coast, and I was just over 2 hours driving. I, had my water. I was getting a little bit tired, but I was okay. My husband was in the side seat. My son was behind me. And I was entering a freeway, but I knew that freeways were highways, so I didn't think anything of it. All of a sudden, we were halfway down the state. We entered this one freeway where all of a sudden there were dips, turns, a lot of traffic. There were eight lanes on each side, mountains that were going down, mountains that were going up, and mountains that were going along, that you were turning along the side. I froze. I literally froze. My son from the back, I went from about 100, the equivalent of 100 kilometers, to literally 20 or 30 kilometers with cars whizzing by. Luckily, there wasn't anybody behind me directly. We were in the second lane. My son from my husband, I guess, hadn't really realized what was going on. My son from the back kept saying, "Mom, you doing okay?" I literally had all of a sudden, that loss of control, the possibility of something happening overwhelmed me. I had to pull over. That was the first time I've had a panic attack while driving. And it's a fear that I now have to be going into new areas or highways. I am anxious about it. And I know that I need to name it. I need to deal with it. I need to face it, because I don't want to lose that freedom that I had to get from point A to point B. I don't always want to have to drive necessarily. I'm thinking maybe I will have to get others driving all the time, but that's thank you, Anne, for saying no to that. But I've looked up, do I need to take more lessons or just, I'm not sure. Anne, you're shaking your head, but I don't know what else to do. Tom, Tom and Anne, any suggestions, I would take them.
Like, I think it was Yanita mentioned meditation and stuff like that. I took a lot of those mindfulness things and yoga and meditation, etc. And the best advice I got, and I've been in a few scary things, was, and I think this Michelle's book said that it was pretty good, where someone was given a speech or in front of the president and climbed on top of his or her nerves. And I was taught to, when the scary stuff comes up like that, to acknowledge it and say, oh, hello again, to breathe into it and just keep going. And it's not easy, but it has become as familiar and as comfortable as that. Oh, it's you again, and breathe into it and keep doing it. And that happened to me in Hawaii when it's 5.5 miles up the road, and then you run out of highway
Mhm.
and watered down road or something. And I'd rented this new car, Chev or something. And anyways, there was another story to it that I won't mention. But so when I finished coming down off the cliff, got in the car, and the road goes in circles like that, and you have these little guardrails that you bump into just in case. Oh, brand new car, the brakes gave out right at the very top. And I went down, started going down faster and faster. And I did that. I just, oh shit, you're here again, are you? And I thanked it. And then I just focused on my breathing and the road, and went all the way down 5.5 miles faster and faster, bumping into the guardrail many times. But I didn't panic. And when I got to the very ground, then the brakes returned. Go figure.
No, I appreciate that. You
And
know,
that
and leaning into that, and you were shaking your head, so I think that's really useful. Whatever we are doing.
Same as what Tom said, because the
Mhm.
only thing that you have to focus on, keep in mind what it was that happened to you. You got terrified because you ended up on a California freeway, which is unlike any other road system you're going to be in. But we've all ended up, even in Canada, you drive through a really awful snowstorm. The
Yeah.
only thing that you can do, and the same thing that Tom said, was you look at what's the next, can you drive the next foot? Can you drive the next kilometer? And then you'll make it.
Yeah.
It's right now, there's nothing wrong with what with your driving or anything like that. You're capable of driving. It's a mental thing.
Yep.
And the panic was the surprise. But what I found in similarly terrifying situations is it's just about, okay, can I make it the next minute? Can I make it the minute after that? The minute after that? I know I'll be okay in a minute. I know that for sure. In the same way that when other things happen, can I survive one day? Yeah, I can survive one day. It's one day, 24 hours, no problem. And then if I break it down into blocks, that's how I can get over it. And I've had panic attacks, fortunately not when I'm driving, but when I was younger, in my early 20s, and once professionally speaking, but again, bad situation that I should have run away from. It's always been break it down into little bits. What can I handle? I can handle that small component of it. If I can handle the little component, then it's just all blocks.
No, I appreciate that. And I see that oftentimes with people and their careers even, right? I can't handle, let's break it down. Okay. What is it that you're working on right now? Whether you're a student, whether you're an associate, whether you're a partner, what is it that you're working on now that is that overwhelming, she called it the monster, right? What is the monster in your head, and how do you break it down, and how do you take the little steps that are necessary to move forward? I think that's
And
really
Gina,
important. Tom?
I found that the most important thing of all of this, even like when I was having to make a decision legally and
Mhm.
present it, that it'd be like, oh, I wanted the perfect decision, and I'd be scared. And the easiest way is for me to acknowledge the fear is there without elaborating on it. Just say hello again, breathe, and go into it. And like Anne says, one foot in front of the other.
No, I appreciate that. You need
That
that?
reminds me of Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. He says that if you look at it, if you observe the emotion, it just goes away. So I really like that book.
Power of Now. Thank you. Parimal, was that a hand up?
I was
Oh.
just saying that you were scared of the California freeway. I'm just scared of highways.
There we go. Okay.
That I have got my license in 2010, but I think on the highway in Canada, I've been there on the highway maybe 3 times or 4 times.
Mhm.
I just get scared of going on the highways. I don't mind taking more time and going in the inner roads, but highway scares me.
I hear you. And again, how do we face that, right? And what do we do with it? Victoria, you've gone into storms directly, but I don't know if that's what you're about to join with us, but tell us
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, and sorry, I don't have a video tonight, but I
Absolutely.
was gonna say, yeah, I was gonna say exactly that before starting, living on a boat and sailing around the islands. I
So
thought,
just let me just back up. Victoria was a practicing lawyer in Greece who then got called to
Yeah.
the bar here in Canada, and a couple, I don't know if it's 2 or 3 years ago, made the,
Yeah.
I think, very brave decision with her partner to literally live on a boat and sail around, well, the Mediterranean
The
for now.
Mediterranean.
So Victoria, go ahead.
Yeah. So I thought, that the fear, I was, I had fear for normal things, like fear of not missing my daughter's childhood, or, of not passing an exam, or normal things, until we got into the storm. And this last year, we got into a huge storm, and the waves were coming from like everywhere. I was asking Jeff, are we gonna die? Like, are we gonna sink? Like, tell me now, are we gonna sink? Like, I seriously, and that's when I think I experienced the real terror of losing your life. Like, I mean, and I agree with that. Like, it's like if you break it down, like the minute, that minute, if you try to be practical and not think, like, I don't know, like what it would mean to give in the fear, but if you don't think about it, and try to be practical and active, you realize that you have survived the 30 last seconds. The next 30 seconds, you're not gonna drown, maybe, and suddenly you feel that you are doing something, like you're managing. You are surviving. You are overcoming, and that little assurance that you have for that 30 past seconds is enough for the next 30 seconds, and kind of the 5 minutes pass, and you get out of it. So yeah, that's how I dealt, at least this last summer, and it was a surprise, because I really thought that I was kind of fearless in my life. So it was a surprise when it came like that. That was
And
my
again,
experience.
so I hope that again you're able to apply those learnings when the storm comes again, not if, but when the storm comes again, right? Because there are
Storm
going to be
will
storms
come.
in our life. There are going to be storms in our life. And I think moving to sort of the next chapter in her book is then Starting Kind. And in that one, she gives the message of enoughness. And I think part of the fear is I'm not enough, I'm not in control, it's going to overwhelm me. And that Starting Kind, the self-compassion and self-love that we sometimes forget to do, and sometimes it sounds hokey. And Tom, I'm glad that you're on it, because I know you talk about this with your students, with lawyers who relate to you a lot. Men and women need to remind themselves to be kind to themselves, not to be beating themselves up over mistakes, or over fears, or over doubts, or over past things that they haven't done perfectly, quote unquote, and being able to be kind. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate, put the gladness up front. She talks about, if I'm not mistaken, it was her mom's lesson to her, put it out there up front. And she talks about a friend who would wake up and, well, it seems silly to say, hey buddy, how you doing today, buddy? Hi there, buddy. Being able to put the gladness up front. Because if you're waking up going, oh God, my hair's out of the way, this is feeling really horrible. Take care. Happy New Year, Anne. And we hope that we'll see you again next year. All the best to you. Thank you for joining us. But again, being able to start your day off with a positive note, I think is really important. But the Starting Kind, I wanted to just sort of put out there. There are a couple of, yes, Paramount, please join me. Oh, hang on.
There was another book which I had read called High Five. And it was similar concept that every time you get up in the morning, you see yourself in the mirror and do a high five with yourself.
I love that.
And then the day goes well because you are celebrating yourself.
I love it. Which book was that, Paramount?
I think it's called High Five.
High Five. Okay, have to look that up. Thank you. No, and again, it's starting off with that positive note. And even when sometimes you're not feeling it, right? Especially when you're not feeling it. I think those are the moments we have to hook on to even more, that we need to be able to change that message that is oftentimes in our mind. And part of that also goes with the next chapter that she says, am I seen? And it was really incredible to remind myself and to read, Michelle Obama feeling that, that she is not, that she's judged by so many others. How many of us, as an immigrant kid, that was something, there's a Greek phrase, "Τι θα πει ο κόσμος," what will people think? And that's part of my immigrant experience, unfortunately, that I always worry about what will people think. And I know that I've passed that on, for example, to my son, even though we shouldn't really care what people think or other people's judgment, care about what we think about ourselves. And so rewrite the story, she says, of not mattering, right? Rewrite that conversation. Don't think about what other messages have come your way. Think about what you see as your strengths, as your qualities. Take your potential differentness, your differences, and turn it around into a positive impression. And I loved her phrase, do not let others' judgment defeat you. How to become unburdened by the judgment of others, especially in law. And think about it. Think about how many different steps. Thank you. High Five Habit by Mel Robbins. But think about how many times in the process of getting to be, just to get called to the bar, you have to write an LSAT, you have to then write an application to law school, you are judged in terms of whether or not you are able to get into law school, then you're judged in all your courses, of course, and then think about any litigation that you might do. You are constantly judged. There's judgment by others about your argument, about your presentation. Law is so open to that possibility of being judged by others, both professionally and personally. We really have to stand in our own strength and stand in our own light, the light that we carry, to be able to say, okay, maybe the judge did not like what I said. Maybe the prof didn't like what I said. Maybe the client didn't like what I did or how I did it. Do a little bit of a reflection on it, but it's not meant to be something to define us always. We might adapt, we might adjust, we might change something that we do later, we might learn from it as feedback, but don't let it sink us into into that hole of, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I can't do this ever again. And I think that's one of the things that as we move through our careers, the judgment from others can really be one of those overwhelming monsters that takes place or takes up real estate in our minds. And part of that, she speaks very, very, very eloquently about. Part of that, unfortunately, is when you don't have role models, representation really matters, because if you don't have role models, what you think is a positive, but you've been told by certain people is a negative, might be really something that's part of your differentness. Until I hit that firm that had a Greek history to it, being able to say, Merry Christmas, or being able to say Happy Name Day and not be seen as, wow, what's a name day? Why are you saying Happy Name Day? It wasn't just comfort, but there was a safety to that. There was a representation. I could be a professional in a way that feels authentic to me, and I've got role models for it. I've heard that from women. I've heard that from people in the LGBT community. I've heard that from married people, single people, people of color, people of different ethnicities. If we don't have representation, we can't see ourselves potentially in certain roles, and that really will let that question of others' judgment, others who don't know who you are or what you're like, will really be a problem. And I wonder if anybody on that part of being seen, not letting others judge you, if there's any takeaways on that, Tom?
Hi, Gina. I was taught by a wise person in the States a long time ago. When you were talking earlier about waking up in the morning and blah, 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 it was a very simple thing that has always worked for me, is to just say, hello, self, how are you today? I choose to be of good service today, and to just leave it there and not to worry about it, because I know myself well enough that I try my very best and I don't worry about it. And that sets my day for me, and it really has worked well. And it gets
Do you
rid of
still
a
do that,
lot.
Tom?
Hi, self. How are you today? I choose to be of good service today.
And do you still do that?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that just it doesn't matter to me what you think of me or others,
Mhm.
because if I'm following my own yardstick, and simple as that.
And
Gets
that's so
rid.
hard for, especially for new professionals, for new people coming in,
Yeah.
because they may not have a sense of what their yardstick is yet. They might not have a sense of who they are yet.
But all you can do is your best.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. We mentioned the kitchen table, and I'm cognizant of the time, and I'm gonna make sure we end as always at 8:30. My kitchen table, my favorite part, this is a kitchen table. For me, being able to have these conversations with people, being able to share our stories with others is really important. But I think, Tom, you mentioned earlier how important it was to seek out people who will be there with you, to seek out people who will give you information, advice, or just listen. Sometimes just listen, and sometimes just do something fun. I was really struck by the weekend that she had planned for her husband when he was president, where she got a bunch of his buddies at Camp David. And yes, there might have been, she was trying to get it to be a phone-free weekend, but the reality of the position interfered. But she says the guys just played basketball, they shot darts, they played cards, they were able to just be. And sometimes we may not have the same group. I've got a bunch of different kitchen tables. And actually, when I read that, I sent out a couple of notes like, thank you for being part of that kitchen table, because it really is important to find the people that we can just let our hair down, let ourselves just sort of chill, or do whatever, whether it's working out, whether it's playing cards, whether it's going to a movie, listening to music, whatever the case is. Finding your kitchen table or your kitchen tables was such an important chapter. And I wonder if it meant anything to anybody else. Tom?
The only thing I'd say in that regard, Gina, is it's nice to have a friend or two or this round kitchen table, but it's so easy to get that advice every day. I mean, I can just walk down the street half a block to a coffee place and get a coffee and see someone walking their dog, and I'll smile and say, "How are you?" And they'll stop, and within a second or two, the person's telling me about themselves, but I can also tell them when they say, "How are you?" I'll say, "Well, I got a problem," and I'll just tell a stranger. And so it does the same thing.
Yeah, and
It's
it's
there.
interesting because one of the things that you said, um, gosh, now I'm trying to remember which of the chapters it was. As wonderful, and as maybe it was in this chapter, as wonderful as these things are for us to stay connected, they're also barriers to our connection, because as you said, we will be walking around and looking at our phones or answering phones and not see the person who's walking their dog, or not smile, not extend a hello. She talks about standing in line ordering coffee, and young people, kids have forgotten how to just stay in line, not look at their phones, and not just young people. I sometimes pull up the phone and will look at whatever craziness that it is on there, to be honest with you. But rather than engage with other humans, we've lost that art and that ability. And I think it really is important. We were doing a program for the TLA on civility. And one of the things that came up was the need for more opportunities for face-to-face contact. Online is great, and I really respect the opportunity that we have to have online, but the ability to actually sit down and just see me slumping, or see me feeling really crappy, or see me really elated, and be able to engage with that without the barrier of a phone. I think that's a skill that especially young professionals really need to appreciate, is a skill, and actually develop it. And I wonder, neither you might be one of the younger ones in the group, but is that something that you see, and you're dealing with technology all the time? So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on the pros and cons of technology, but the skills that are necessary for actual interaction and engagement.
I I exactly. I deal a lot with technology. Also because my job includes part of innovation, and uh, I've seen this. I have 3 Instagram accounts, LinkedIn. I don't have Facebook, but I manage pages for Facebook. So you're on so many platforms. I think it's important to understand why you're there. If you are there to interact, but also to what I try to remind myself is try to be the creator and not the consumer in those platforms. So try to not as much absorb things passively, but also to time limits. Like especially with I don't have my phone when I work. I put it in far away from me because I'm tempted to just check it. So time limits, and try to provide like I don't, because I have so many platforms, I take longer to respond because people may have texted me to one, so I don't really check them. But yeah, and try to set time with like for recurring meetings with people that matter to you. So I see my friends from different environments, try to meet them every couple of months to just check in on them and hear their updates. And a lot of things change in a month with it. So I see them, they change jobs, they change relationships. So you don't really see those on Instagram or in these platforms.
No, Victoria?
There are things that, are communicated only with a presence, like, and that thing can never happen with the phones or online. So I remember this one day in like maybe 7, 8 years ago when I was taking the exams. We were doing the accreditation exams, and we had a study group, and one day I called Jana, a friend of mine, a Brazilian lawyer, and she said, like, let's get together for a coffee. So I go down to the coffee place. She comes up without saying a word, sits down, and we both start crying without a word, just because the pressure was so insane. The work, the life. We didn't have to say anything. It was just because we knew, and just and that thing. It can never happen if there is no physical, participation. Like you have to be in front of the other. And I don't want to miss that. I don't want to lose this.
And it's something that we oftentimes, I oftentimes will tell sort of young associates or new professionals, not just with their colleagues and their family and friends, but also with clients. Clients need to feel that too. They need to feel that that you care about them, that they're not just a file number, that you actually care about them, and that you have listened to them, that you have thought about them, and that you're seeing their joy, their struggle, whatever it is, whether it's a corporate matter, whether it's a real estate matter, whatever the case is. And it's a real skill that we need to be able to remember to develop together with all the other skills that we have. But I think it's really important. Those kitchen tables are really, really important. The one other chapter that I wanted to look at, there's a few, of course, but the whole of us. She talks about being whole. And at Ryerson, I remember they're at TMU now, they used to have this HR saying, bring your whole self to work. And it's a great mission. It's a great inspired opportunity. Bring your whole self to work. But I would talk to some staff sometimes and say, I can't really bring my whole self. If I bring my curly hair, or if I bring my loud voice, or if I bring my home cooking to the office, people are gonna not like me. People are gonna think that judgment all of a sudden comes up, and that fear of being judged comes up. So it comes with a bit of a vulnerability, right? You want to bring all your imperfections, or some, and it's funny because I think Michelle Obama actually says, you've got to think of what you do bring and what you don't bring to the office or to your professional life. This might be part of her next chapter, but that whole idea of code switching, do we put on a certain mask or a certain act in a professional setting? And I think there's a time where we can be part of who we are authentically, but there's other times when, I'm not going to wear my ripped jeans or my ripped whatever to a client meeting or to an office meeting necessarily. it's a bit of a balancing act. You want to be vulnerable, you want to be authentic, but what about that balance between, are you able to, can you, are you permitted to? And I guess one of the things that I would say is, if your organization encourages it, you might decide to do so at some times and not to do so at others, but if it encourages it, great. If it doesn't encourage it, that's a message. I think that's a cultural message from your organization to say, we value who you are. Sure, you might want to be a little bit, laid back or hold back a little bit if you're with a client or whatever else, but really bring your whole self to the work that you do. It's not cut and dry. There've been times when I've thought I can be my casual self with clients or with new professionals, and other times where I think, oh, no, I can't. I can't be a hugger with everybody, for example. I can't be very casual with everybody, even though that's who I normally am, until I remind myself I'm also the person who can be a little bit more refined, a little bit more of this. So I found that whole of us, the chapter on the whole of us and the armor that we wear were challenging, because there is need. The one thing that I took away from her is adaptability and preparedness. Know who your audience is, know what they're expecting, know yourself and what you have to do, and be ready to pivot, be ready to adapt as you need. When I walked
He
into
also said, go high.
that, yes, I wanted to end on that, Tom. You're absolutely, go high. The integrity that we want to have as we're dealing with things that may be off. And I think that whole piece about going high for me, from her, was about two things. One, it's all about integrity. So integrity for yourself and really understanding what matters to us. But it was also part of her reminder. It's easy to say it. When they go low, you go high. She says, you can emblazon it on a t-shirt or on a cup, but boy, is it ever hard work to live it. And I've seen that in different organizations that I've been at. You can talk the talk, but are you walking the walk? And I think even as a profession, our legal profession, we talk a lot of talk, but sometimes walking the walk is missing, I find. I don't know how others feel about, that whole third chapter, the whole third section of her book, the whole of us, the armor we wear in going high. There's a lot there. Being in integrity for yourself, for the communities that you are, and for the organizations that you're within. I'm just curious if anybody has any thoughts before we wrap up on those elements of trying to be who you are authentically, and with integrity in the profession that we are in particular. Any final thoughts, Yunita?
I was just going to say, it doesn't have to be with everyone. I'm sure that within an organization, you can find a couple of people that you resonate more with you, so you can be more true. Or different people can speak to different parts of your personality. So some people can be more spiritual, some people can be more athletic. So you can just find common grounds with each of them. And for the last chapter, the going high, I feel like it takes a lot of confidence in you as well, that you're not, whenever you're doing that, that you're not feeling the victim of the situation. So you really have to believe that you're doing this because you believe that something better will come out of this, and you're not being wronged or the victim.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm looking at the time. I wanted to end with a thank you to all of you who are either watching now or watching later. And to quote Michelle Obama, because I started these career conversations just over a year ago with a chance just to have conversations about our careers. And it was interesting. She started the book and she ended the book with the following: I don't actually have all that many answers to give. And I feel the same way. I believe that real answers come from longer, deeper dialogues, a conversation we all try to have together. So I am very grateful to all of you for the conversation that we're having together. I want to thank everybody who's participated in the 2023 conversations. And just as a reminder that the 2024 conversations will kick off with Gorik Eng, who is a first generation and professional in the States. And he has a really fantastic book that reminds us of the unspoken rule. So we talk about being authentic. He also talks about understanding and figuring out what those unspoken rules are. So it'll be, I think, a good conversation to have in January. But for now, as Michelle has reminded us, We all carry a light, and I am very grateful to all of you. And I want to wish you all a very, very happy New Year. Take care, everyone.
Happy New Year, Jean.
Thank you. Bye
Happy
now.
New Year.
Bye.
Bye.